So let me take just a moment and tell you about our friends at Campfire Blend Coffee, campfireblend.com. You've heard me talk about their product, Whiskey Coffee, and I tell you, they make great products over there, but what I really appreciate is the fact that they're a small business that is really striving hard to create, which is exactly what we want in this country at this time, are small businesses. And we also really appreciate that they have been willing to partner with us and have been willing to support us. So when you go to campfireblend.com and you purchase coffee, be sure to use the code BlueLine. That's going to save you 10%, but then that's also going to help us, and it's also going to support their small business. So go to campfireblend.com, use the code BlueLine for 10% off. Now, back to the show. Welcome to the On the Blue Line podcast. This is called The Interview Room, and I am your host, Wayne Mulder, and I'm happy to be back with you again today. I've had some great guests that I've been able to sit down and talk to, and people from all different walks of life, very interesting stories, and I hope you're enjoying them as much as I'm enjoying getting the opportunity to sit down with these people and have these conversations. This week's guest, we all have a story, a recollection, some remembrance, well, us who are older, of where we were on 9/11. It said you'll never forget what you were doing that day, that morning. Well, I have yet to have sat down and interviewed or spoken to a guest who was actually inside the World Trade Center that fateful morning. So that was up until today when I sat down and I spoke with Samantha Horwitz. So you are not going to want to miss that part of this interview. She's going to walk us through that day, but then she's going to walk us through the days after and the changes in her life and then the positive things that came later and where that took her to and what she's doing today. So without taking any more time, do not miss this episode. Today's guest, Samantha Horwitz. Well, Sam, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks, Wayne. I appreciate you having me.
It's great to be able to sit down, and I've read a little bit about your story, and I'm telling you, the listeners are going to love to hear this. It's very powerful, and I think it's something that's really going to resonate with a lot of people.
It's a pleasure to be able to share. It's a story that seems almost timeless, no matter how many years have gone by, and this is the 20th year of the anniversary of September 11th. Everyone remembers where they were when everything happened.
You're absolutely right. And we'll get a little bit deeper into that in just a minute. Let me start with some of the easy questions I ask every guest that comes on the show. Coffee or tea?
Oh, coffee, absolutely. And lots of it.
Yeah,
I got mine right here.
Yeah, you and me both. That seems to be the default with law enforcement.
Absolutely.
Do you have any favorite type of coffee? It doesn't need to be a brand, but any favorite type, or do you just like dark coffee or?
I actually got into a lot of the keto stuff, bulletproof coffee a long time ago with Dave Asprey, and it's kind of morphed into my own concoction. I don't know that most people would like what I put in my coffee, but let's just say it's dark roast and it's not filled with creamer. It's not flavored. It's not anything like that. It's got the MCT oils in it. To get my morning going, got a little like mushroom stuff going on.
Good.
Yeah. Cinnamon.
Yeah. I'm finding that stuff to become more and more popular as well.
The MCT?
Yeah. With
whether you use the MCT oil or you use, the grass-fed butter and mix that in, even the proteins in coffee has become very popular. I just haven't found one that mixes well with the hot liquid. It gets kind of clumpy and stuff like that. But I don't know, maybe after this, it goes out and people say, hey, I know the kind of protein that she needs to put in her coffee. Your listeners will fill in the gaps for me.
They always do. There's always someone out there listening that's like, yeah, I know exactly the answer to that. I mean, that's the beautiful thing about social media, I guess.
You got it.
So do you have a favorite place to have that cup of coffee? Maybe a place of relaxation or?
I am in it right now. I finished a construction project that was probably 3 years in the creation. COVID put a crimp on everything, scheduling, getting the guys out to the house, just to measure and create what I wanted. And it is an office. I live on the water. And so I overlook a lake. And so I am looking, as I speak into the mic, I've got 5 windows, big windows, looking right out onto the water. And this is my space that I start my day in with my hot cup of coffee, and do a little reading, sometimes just a little quiet time, meditation.
Yep.
I don't know. It's my version of meditation. If you look up meditation, my version probably doesn't fit the dictionary definition of meditation, but it is a purposeful way to start my day, because in law enforcement, I like to say we're yanked around from one call to the next, from one assignment to the next, from one report that's due to the next. And unless you can set your day so that you can win, I don't know, the stress just kind of can overwhelm and take over. And that's really been my passion the past bunch of years since I published the book. And went through my own post-traumatic stress journey, getting that kind of information out there on how to beat the stress. And you got to start it first thing in the morning.
That is awesome. Can I ask in broad strokes, maybe a little bit about that meditation process? I mean, is it reading, journaling, breathing, a little mixture of all the above?
So the meditation process that I do, it just includes more of a breathing and getting in touch with. So feeling my feet on the floor, feeling my seat, my rear end in my seat, and monitoring my breathing. We know from the exercise, we know from studies, when we exercise, we tend to breathe from the chest. When we're stressed, we tend to breathe up here. When we want to bring everything down and be calm, we want to breathe from our diaphragm. Yeah. So it's having everything connected. And I envision that breath loop. So feet, seat, diaphragm, and it goes in a continuous loop. And I close my eyes, but I have a practitioner that actually teaches that in one of our workshops that we do with an organization that I started called A Badge of Honor with a retired NYPD detective. And it's the most utilized, because we put out surveys and we do studies after each workshop. It's the most utilized technique in the field. Yeah. And officers use it multiple times a day, whether it's first thing in the morning, they use it throughout their day, whether they're sitting at their office or even in their cars. And of course, after, a stressful or traumatic call, right? Just kind of get grounded. Yeah. And then I do read as well. And my journaling, I'm self-admitted on and off with the journaling. I do journal, but it's short, almost just to get the thoughts out on paper. And then I move on throughout my day, very tactical in the way my day is planned and the way I carry it out.
That's great. And I appreciate that. I'd like to have the listeners hear that, because, coming from law enforcement, especially being a male in law enforcement, it's a very macho alpha. So I remember being a new academy recruit, and you're sitting there in the room and we would have an instructor and talking about breathing techniques, or, hey, we're going to dim the lights and we're all, we're going to try this stress exercise or whatever. And when you first start out, you're like, really, what am I in? Like kindergarten? Do I get nap time also while we're doing this? Right. Now, years later, it's powerful. I do more of like the Wim Hof method, the crazy guy that jumps in the cold ice water.
Oh yeah.
But it's the power of that is just amazing. And that's what I wanted the listener to kind of hear, because.
Yeah, absolutely. There is breath technique for everything that you want to create in your environment. So Wim Hof is great if you want to create a lot of energy in the way that he teaches the breathing. It is a very specific, I call it, I like to use the word tactical because we relate to that word in law enforcement. But yeah, you got to pay attention, because, you could faint and that would be bad, especially if you're in water. And then there's the breathing to slow everything down. A lot of what we still don't talk about in law enforcement is how the job affects our health overall. We already know we have the stress because we can feel it in our bodies. We're no mystery to stress. And what we tend to learn is, let's use the best techniques to just push it down, to just get rid of it because I got to go, go, go. Keeping the mind going is actually a really good thing, because as you can stay focused on the tasks, you're able to accomplish that effectively. Right. It's what happens in the quiet moment. What happens after we get off an 8-hour or 12-hour, depending on what's going on in your jurisdiction. What do we do then? Because when we get to the end of the shift, that's where that off switch or the dimmer switch, that's where we don't tend to kind of pay attention. So what do? We go to choir practice, right?
Right.
We need a couple of drinks to kind of slow everything down. And once we've got the alcohol that's running through us, then we're like, oh yeah, this is good. Or we go home to our lazy boy, or to our favorite seat on the couch, crack open a cold one, just sit back, turn on the TV. And Wayne, I don't know about you, but for me, after getting off a 12-hour, I could sit in front of the TV with my favorite beverage, and I could click, use the remote. Yep. This is before you could talk into your remote.
Right. Hey Siri. Yeah.
Right. But I wasn't watching anything. It's just clicking.
Yeah.
And it was to get this off the workday.
Some people may not understand that, but that is a powerful point that you make right there. Because I early on was wondering, why do I spend probably a year or so ago, I would sit there, like you said, just search through, and because I really didn't want to watch anything, but it was just this decompression technique of searching through these different menus such as Netflix and Amazon and so forth.
Yeah, it's a form of decompression, but it's more a form of distraction. Right. But we're not learning, and some departments are better than others, but we're still not learning to process through the day that we just experienced and the stress that came with it. Whether you're, a new sergeant that had to give a presentation, to the chief, and you've never done that before. You don't take the time to pat yourself on the back to appreciate what you did, to process it. Hey, how could I have made this better? Whatever that looks like. And we surely don't process well the call that went bad, the child that drowned,
right, the
accident, the shooting. I mean, look what just happened in Florida with the FBI agents.
Yep.
And that makes everybody in law enforcement, no matter where you are in the US, take a pause. But you being there in Florida, it's like, whoa, this is hitting really close to home.
Yeah.
We don't process that.
You're right. You're absolutely right.
We're not taught how to do that. And so we've got to distract. We've got to divert. We've got to drink. We've got to do those things, even though we know, I probably shouldn't be doing this.
Right.
It's not the greatest. Go hit the gym. I know officers, they're like, I don't do gym in the beginning of my, before my shift. I do it at the end, and I got 5 guys, and by that I mean women too, that go, and we've got a group. That's a fantastic way to decompress. But if you're purposely doing things to be distracted instead of giving yourself the ability to process, what's going to happen year over year is I liken it to a file cabinet. Okay. We now keep it on our computer, but let's say we still have an old-fashioned file cabinet around. Okay, I'm dating myself. I had pagers, when I was on the job. So we've got a file cabinet, and each incident or call that maybe was kind of yucky, it just didn't leave a great feeling. Yeah. You got what you needed to get done, but it was like, wow, that was kind of tough. Okay, we file it in the filing cabinet. Well, if we're working a career that's, I mean, gosh, if you're in New York City, you could fill that file cabinet in 5 years. So you got over 5 years, you've worked a tremendous amount of calls, you've seen a lot. I mean, that was my experience in New York, in the city. Your file cabinet will eventually get full. And it could be the next call you go on. And what that call may seem completely benign and routine to the officers that respond with you, whether that be a partner or other units.
Right.
But for you, bam, it triggers something. And so everything in that cabinet, in that filing cabinet, just starts pouring out. And now you can't control it. Well, we live our lives in a controlled environment. The number one thing that sends us home every night is because we are trained to be hyper vigilant. We are trained to control our environment the best way that we can,
right, so
that we get to go home. Well, your file cabinet has just gone poof. And now you've got all these thoughts, memories, feelings, sensations, and you don't know what to do with them. And there's not enough of this drinking, and there's not enough of surfing that's going to take that away. And then what do you do?
Right. And that is the question, which we'll touch on that here in just a second. Let's back up for the listener, though, just real quick. You got your start at the U.S. Secret Service, correct? Could you talk
correct.
A little bit about your beginnings in law enforcement?
Yeah, well, I knew from probably 6 months into being in law school that there was no way I wanted to be a lawyer. I did not want to sit behind a desk, shuffle paper. I mean, there are cool things about being a lawyer, but I just decided it wasn't for me. I had the blessing and the opportunity to do a very intensive internship with the U.S. Attorney's Office, as well as the state's attorney's office, where I'm from back in Maryland. I'm in Texas now. And I got to meet law enforcement agents from every federal law enforcement agency. We were working a huge drug case. And I was like, that's what I want to do. So I geared every law school elective that I could around the criminal system, learning the inside and out, and graduated, took a year to work, decided to get my feet wet in all things dentistry. My mom is a dental hygienist. She just retired after more than 50 years. Wow. She says down in the mouth with folks. And so I worked in her office. I did record keeping. I did file management, lots of stuff with the computer. And then when it came time to apply to the different academies, my father worked for the feds at the Department of Energy, and he said, hey, have you ever thought about the Secret Service? And I said, well, aren't those the guys that are with the president, you know, dark suits, sunglasses? I want to do some type of investigation.
Right.
And he's like, no, they have that. I said, let me see. Took the application packet, read through it. Again, nothing online. Everything is paper. So it's about the application, I think, was something like 40 pages. I filled it out. I was invited to take what was called the Treasury Enforcement Exam. The United States Secret Service used to be under the Department of Treasury. After 9/11, it transitioned into the Department of Homeland Security. Right. So landed an invite with Secret Service because it is an invitation, and you go through special agent in training. So it's like a pre-academy to see if you can kind of cut the mustard. And for me, it was, hey, can I hang with the guys at this level? And I got invited to the next level, which was the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center down in Glencoe, Georgia. Yep. Went there for a bunch of weeks, then came back to Beltsville, which is where the Secret Service Training Academy is, went through there, and then it was like, you're going to big bad New York City. So as far as field offices go, Miami, New York City, and then you have Washington, D.C. You're
Okay.
outside of DC, you're assigned to a criminal investigations division. That's exactly what I was looking for. Landed a spot in the Electronic Crimes Task Force, which for its time was the cutting edge in law enforcement. Any crime you could commit utilizing phone, utilizing computer, any electronic device, it was landing on our laps. We did compete with the FBI for a lot of investigations. We have to go to Congress. It's not people that don't understand. Well, how did the Secret Service investigate these crimes? The FBI gets bank robbery because we go to Congress every year and we have to petition. I basically ask permission to say, hey, we've been doing this for this long. Can we continue or do we need to change? So when DHS was created, we had to do a lot of moving and dividing and a lot of moving parts in that. But needless to say, that my world changed dramatically after that move to Department of Homeland Security.
And most of you do, just to ask a question for the listener who may be wondering, but a lot of those in Secret Service also rotate through protection details as well, yes. Right? So that's a portion of what they do as a rotation. And then your primary is the investigations of wherever your field office is.
So New York is unique.
Okay.
In that when you're assigned to the New York field office, yes, you're assigned to a criminal squad. However, the UN is there. So okay. Every foreign dignitary visiting United States soil, if they're coming in for the UN, comes to our office. So I fell in love with the protection side. I never intended for that to happen, but I fell in love with it.
Wow. Well, and I've heard that from others. I've known, we had several guys on the task force in our economic crimes unit dealing specifically with the counterfeit side and so forth. And yeah, I've heard that before from other agents. So how many years were you in the Secret Service?
3 short years.
Okay.
I intended it to be a lifelong career, but on September 11th, that changed everything. I was in Tower 1 when American Airlines Flight 11 was flown into it.
And that's where I wanted to go next. I wanted to go to, and I know and I'll link this up for the listeners. You've spoken about this many times. In fact, your book is about this very thing, and we'll be sure to tell the listeners about it. But can you just take us there? I mean, as you stated at the beginning of this interview, everyone remembers 9/11 and where they were. I was in landscaping at the time. I remember exactly where I was, sitting in the truck, and the local radio station, the country station there, played John Lennon's Imagine. They didn't know what else to do, so it's a country station, and they played that song. So can you take us to that day, that in broader strokes of kind of what?
Yeah, so our field office was in World Trade Center 7. For your listeners, the World Trade Center complex was made up of 7 buildings, all spread throughout a complex, which was interconnected both underground to some of the buildings, but a plaza level on top where you could walk to any of the buildings after getting off an elevator. And I was just going to work. And I parked my G-Ride where I always parked, under Building 1, under World Trade Center Tower 1, took the elevator up to the lobby level where I would get out, take an escalator up, walk out onto the plaza and across a pedestrian walkway to my building, Building 7. Well, on that day, I got into the elevator, and as I'm starting the ascent up, all of a sudden the elevator car starts shaking and the lights start flickering, and I'm thinking, I'm getting stuck in an elevator. This is not a good way to start the day. And then it was as if a hand grabbed onto the top of the elevator car and just started yanking us up really, really fast. So complete malfunction. And I was like, whoa. And the elevator car luckily stopped at the lobby level. But when the doors flew open, it was myself and it was packed full.
Yeah.
We were met with the hottest just ball of dust and debris. It kind of pushed us back as we went to step out. My training brain immediately took over. I was like, okay, there's been an explosion, because I recognized the debris field, papers flying all over the place. I said, get out. And I turned around and I noticed that people were not coming out of the elevator, that people were standing, turning in circles. And I just like, oh, this is not good. So I just started grabbing people. I went up the escalator that I normally went up, but instead of going out my normal exit door, my gut said, Sam, just keep going forward, and headed forward to an exit door I'd never used before, had two people in tow. We hit the plaza level and we are stopped in our tracks. And there is a debris field raining down just all around us, pieces of metal, pieces of concrete, and pieces of people.
Right.
And it was like, okay, this explosion, which is again, what was going through my brain, is really big and really serious. And it just so happens this exit door that I went out of, the building, the way it was constructed was it had an overhang.
Okay.
So we were not getting hit with any of the debris.
Oh, wow.
The building was shielding us from this. So I immediately switched back into like full on paying attention to everything going on around me. I said, mission, get to my building. That's where I had all my equipment. That's where my safe space, right? Surrounded by my coworkers, my squad mates. Shimmied my way around the building with the women. One woman ended up going in an opposite direction. So I had one woman in tow. We get to the corner of that building. I look across the pedestrian walkway and I could see my supervisor in the lobby of 7, because a 7 is all glass. They rebuilt it. It's still all glass.
Okay.
And I'm concentrating on her. I can read her lips. She's saying, come on, Sam, run. Now, at this point, I am in a really safe space because there's no debris coming down that could reach me. But my fear was, hey, I'm going to take off running and I'm going to hit that glass covered walkway and something's just going to come take me out. Right. This is where the imagination starts going. But then I rationally was like, well, wait a second, Sam, she has a completely different viewpoint and perspective than you do. She can see behind and up where I couldn't. And she would never purposely draw me out into more danger. So she truly had my back.
Right.
Okay. And so I turned to the woman who was with me. I said, come on, we're going that way. I pointed to the walkway. We started running. She broke away from me, went down a set of steps off the plaza. I don't know what happened to her. I continued my run, made it to the lobby of my building. And as I'm talking to my supervisor, she's making sure I'm okay. I'm like, what in the world is going on? You know, I keep telling her, I'm like, I'm fine, just what's going on? And nobody truly knows what's going on, but we're all thinking, you know, the proverbial dust will settle, things will calm down, and we will go up to our offices and start investigating what this explosion was.
Right.
And as we're standing there, Tower 2 gets hit. And the whole glass front of our building bows inward and then pops back out. It stayed intact.
Wow.
But we all looked at each other silently and we're thinking the same thing. We are the 3rd tallest building in the World Trade Center complex, and we're next. Coordinated bombing attack.
Right.
And in addition to the U.S. Secret Service field office being in there, Mayor Giuliani's Office of Emergency Management was in the building, and some other agencies that the public generally did not know about. So we had a fully secured building. And we decided we have to get out. We have no choice but to evacuate. So I never made it up to my office to grab, you know, the tools of the trade. I had my gun, I had my badge, but other things that I wanted to get, it was just like, we got to get out. Right. And we made it to West Side Highway, which was 2 blocks away. And that's when we caught our first glimpse into what had occurred. And it's Tower 1 in front of us with a huge gaping hole at the top. And then Tower 2 behind it with, you could see the smoke trail. So when the elevator car, when I was in it traveling upward, when it shook and the lights flickered, that's when American Airlines Flight 11 had hit the building. And it was the exchange inside the elevator shafts, the oxygen, the air exchange that had to take place to feed the fuel, the fire that was all the way at floor 94. So we were at the lobby. So it was, there were two elevator cars. So we came up and the elevator car next to us went down so rapidly that elevator car, the doors blew off, almost severed the leg of a World Trade Center complex employee, maintenance employee that was at the lowest level ground floor. And luckily, another agent was there, was not in the debris in the path of the door when it came off, and he carried the employee out through the garage. Yeah. Wow,
that's incredible, and a story that really, I mean, there's a lot of takeaways, which I'm sure you probably go, I have not read your book yet. I will be reading your book, but I'm sure that there's a lot of lessons, and we're going to get to some that happened after that. But just when you talk about things such as divine providence or whatever someone believes in, and when you talk about even that moment of fright or flight or freeze, which you saw among the other people there at the elevator doors, fortunately, your training. In fact, just a few minutes ago, I was recording what I call my morning roll call. It's my Monday morning roll call that comes out every week. And I was talking about Officer Downg. I was referring to the agents, the FBI agents, and then some other cases we've had. And it's interesting in that moment, and a lot of civilians may not understand it, but yeah, you really got a glimpse of how people react in the unknown. And fortunately for us, a lot of times our training will kick in.
Yeah, fortunately, most of the time our training kicks in because we don't stop. We train. And in our training, we trained in the midst of chaos. Usually doing protective movements. So when the proverbial poop hits the fan, you get the protectee into the vehicle, bang, you get out of there. Well, when you're driving and things are exploding, we also train in our tactical village, if you will, and you're walking down a street, stuff happens, what do you do? Yep. So lots of different scenarios, and so you don't find yourself ever in that freeze. The flight or fright is, you fight through. I mean, that's our career. Right. That's that switch that is really difficult to turn off. In the beginning, we can manage it, but then it's like, and it's not us recognizing it. It's usually friends, family, like, what's wrong with you? Right?
Yes, that's exactly it.
Mad? What, the switch starts getting flipped real easy.
So let's go into the days after that then. So after 9/11, it led to maybe some darker, and correct my language if I'm wrong, but maybe some darker days or more of a spiral of sorts for you after 9/11. Can you take us into that after the events that you've explained to us?
Yeah, well, imagine one day you're going to work. Yeah, you have an office that you show up at, and then the next day it's gone. And I mean gone. Because if you remember, Building 7 was the last one to come down that day. Yeah. Okay, so here we are, the second largest field office for the United States Secret Service. We have no field office. It's gone. What do you do? Okay, we got 2 days off. We were all called in for crisis intervention. The management team came up from DC, big, sit in a circle, whatever. And now it's time to go back to work. Well, I took some time off, really because my family, who was in Maryland, I'm working in New York, they needed to see my body, that I am okay. And they could hear my voice, but they needed to see that I was okay. So I took some time, then returned to an office. It was our squad and one other squad on the Upper West Side of New York, above a BMW car dealership. We took whatever space was available for rent in New York City. We had some, I think our counterfeit squad was at the post office, which then got hit by anthrax. And so everything that we had there, all the computers, everything that we got up back and running was all trashed again. We had to start over from scratch. But hey, that's what we do. We adapt, improvise, and overcome. And we set our minds and our hearts to that. But this wasn't functioning well. Couldn't sleep, wasn't eating. Drinking was like, hey, I can sleep if I have a couple of beers. Now, that being said, I never showed up to work impaired. I never drove my vehicle, my G-Ride, impaired. I never worked a protective detail impaired. We knew the consequences of that, and we knew it coming out of training. I mean, that was, you don't mess around with that if you want to keep your career. So I found myself sitting at my computer, reading the same paragraph of a report that I had to hand in, thinking, okay, this is the definition of insanity. I am literally going crazy because I can't process things the way I used to. Everything was way harder to figure out. My concentration wasn't there. And it got to a point where I really just thought that if I can't be 100% and do my job 100%, well, somebody might not go home that night, because that's on protection. You're 100%, or that's not good.
Right.
And so I made the very difficult decision to resign my position as an agent. I wasn't the only one. 7 other agents followed me out the door, which is unprecedented for a field office in a month. And I thought that getting out of New York City was what I needed to do. I wasn't driving into the city. I wasn't smelling the smells. I wasn't seeing the freezer trucks, which had nothing to do with ice cream. You know, I wasn't reliving and re-experiencing 9/11.
Right. But
when it's up here, your mind, I liken it to, you go through a traumatic event and your brain just takes pictures. It's almost like being at the press corps, listening to an interview on the television, or any movement that the president of the United States does. The press corps is there with the cameras, and they're flashing, 50 pictures, just one after the other. You can visibly hear it, even though you can't see them taking the pictures. That's what your brain is doing. And I couldn't shut it off. And despite the fact that I was now living with my husband, we were living separated all this time, there was no shutting off this faucet. I did not know what was happening to me. Didn't really know a lot about post-traumatic stress. And I just needed it to stop. And what happened was I accidentally discovered that the more I drank, the less nightmares I had. So, okay, if I just stay at the bottom of a bottle, which isn't good.
No, that's not a great solution, even if it works.
Not a great solution. So I got my, 4 or 5 hours of sleep, and then I was up again. So, it didn't help at all. Well, I should say it helped some, but in the long run, didn't help at all. And then post-traumatic stress had its claws in so deep. I woke up one morning, went into the bathroom, and looked at the mirror and did not recognize my own reflection staring right back at me. It was the scariest moment in my life. I never experienced anything like that. And at that moment, I was just like, well, forget this. I'm not even me anymore. Like, who is this person?
Right.
And I found myself in my basement one night with my gun and a whole bunch of alcohol, just ready to end it. Had my gun to my head, started squeezing the trigger, and I had my eyes closed. And a voice said, Sam, just like that, just Sam, it's not your time. And that strong Sam, I opened my eyes. I knew I was by myself in my basement.
Right.
And I'm looking around, and I at the time I was just like, okay, now I'm hearing things. It was the big man upstairs, obviously.
Yeah.
And at least that's what I choose to believe. And I was in such a deep, dark place, I didn't want to believe it though. And it was just part of, I think the script in my head was something like, oh, that's, you know, the crazy Sam talking, this unknown person that I just stared at staring back at me in the mirror. And so I put my gun back to my head, started squeezing the trigger, and my dog jumps into my lap.
Wow.
Okay. I had a miniature schnauzer. It was 10 pounds, named Solomon. Okay. I'm not like, you can't make the story up with all the biblical references. And it was not, I grew up in a semi religious household, mostly just traditional holidays,
Right.
but not like every week worshiping actively, that whole thing. But like I said, you can't make these references up. So Solomon jumps into my lap. I look down into his face, and I swear he's talking back at me with his eyes, just saying, you know, I need you, you need to stay. And I passed out, came to a few hours later. Solomon is curled up right by my side. And I had a choice to make. It's like, right now, am I going to end this? Am I going to press the trigger and be done? Or I've been interrupted twice. Is there a bigger meaning behind all this? So I dug my heels in, and I was like, all right, we got to figure this out. I've always been somebody who figures things out. And the biggest mind trick that post-traumatic stress does when you're suffering is it shuts down the part of your brain, the logical reasoning part of your brain, that allows you to figure stuff out. I didn't know that until I got help to understand, like, hey, Sam, you have, you know, my therapist, you have post-traumatic stress. I was like, oh, okay. Well, then what do we do about it? How do we figure this out? How do we get through this? And you know, God love her, she was a very skilled practitioner. I did eventually get the help that I needed in the form of, it's called EMDR, it's eye movement desensitization reprocessing.
Yep.
Highly, highly effective treatment for law enforcement. You have to process many traumas. In my case, I'll say, I guess I'm lucky, it was only really one. But I did have the death of a family member, follow 9/11 very closely after. And I ended up not knowing this, but I had to process through that as well. And yeah, I got better. I understood what was happening, and I understood the triggers. I understood that I could be driving my car and smell the smell of burning concrete. You know, It happens in construction anywhere. Yeah. And that, the olfactory, so your sense of smell, is the most powerful sense. And that, for me, was what impacted me the most. So I really had to recognize what my triggers were so I wouldn't be caught off guard. And by caught off guard, I mean, like, if there was a thunderstorm after 9/11, I was looking for the closest piece of furniture to dive under.
Right.
That's not a normal response for a grown adult, especially a grown adult law enforcement. Okay? No, we don't jump under things with loud noises. We run towards them, right?
You're right.
So that's what I mean. Everything was kind of turned upside down, not making sense.
And a lot of people may not understand that unless they've been through it, but I love the way that you're describing it. Obviously you're describing what you went through, but it's very real, and something that I've even seen on smaller scale myself, you know, for those who have been through shootings and so forth. Maybe it's the 4th of July fireworks, or, you know, certain scenes, like you were pointing out, the smells. There's certain things, especially when you get into like decomp and so forth, just certain things that trigger. And then all of a sudden, you know, like you said, if it's something that hasn't been dealt with, it may take you right back to that moment.
Absolutely. It is when you finally connect the dots in smelling burning concrete makes your body do this, you're reliving X, and you can stop that and realize, okay, you're smelling this, you're not reliving this, you're in the present, you're right here, right now. It's like taking in just new breath. It's new life, it's new awareness. And it's the biggest thing that I teach in the workshops, the takeaways, myself and my partners in a badge of honor, is we are connecting the dots for our first responder community. And you don't have to suffer.
That's great.
And we give them tools and tactics leaving the workshop that they can do at home, while they're at work, in the car, wherever they are, you know, they even actively with their families. But most importantly, we give them that safety net, because anybody that participates in our workshop, anybody listening to this and watching this will know they can go to abadgeofhonor.com, scroll down to our resources. And these are our vetted partners from across the United States that we work with, that any first responder can go outside their agency. It's 100% confidential, and get the help that they need.
That's great. And I'll be sure to, I'm going to mention that again here at the end. And I also will make sure that we link that up. Let me ask you one quick question, because I know we're getting a little short on time. You say that having, though, post-traumatic stress is not the greatest challenge facing today's first responders. What is the greatest challenge facing today's first responders?
Wow. Well, since the political climate has changed.
Yes. I was going to say, this question may mean a little something different in 2020 and 2021.
Yeah, exactly. So while I would have answered that, the unknown right now, the inability to have all of the facts to make a tactical law enforcement type of decision that we're used to making is what's missing now. And when we don't have that sense of control, it doesn't work out so well, because we don't have a clearly defined direction to operate in every single day. And you can read about it. First of all, we're up to 16 suicides for the year. Okay, that's we have been talking about this since the pandemic first started, that we were going to start that once things kind of slowed down. Now, COVID is very real, but we know the statistics, if you really dive into it, it's not real. We just had Dr. Kelly Victory on our show the other night. And so things have kind of had this slowdown.
Right.
So we have the slowdown. So now we have law enforcement officers. Again, how am I processing in the slowdown? We're not doing it very well, because 16 of our brothers and sisters are gone. Okay. Yeah. So this misdirection is all of the major cities in the United States. Whatever the political party that is of the populace in these cities, what we are seeing is that the chiefs are now taking orders, taking direction from people that should not be given directions to the chiefs of police.
Right.
There is a clear, line of the way things, chain of command, if you will. It's kind of muddied when you get above the chief, but there is a chain of command in the departments. There's also a chain of command and how information is supposed to flow on down into the police department. We got this going on, wires crossed, where you have the chiefs going, what is our mission today?
Right.
Do I have PPE? Where am I supposed to send my guys? Are we supposed to be in hospitals? Are we not supposed to be in hospitals?
Yeah.
That is not how law enforcement has ever functioned.
You're so right.
Clear defined roles equal clear, defined mission. And right now, that is the most difficult thing that our officers are dealing with on any given day.
Do you think that can be solved? Or is it more about dealing with the officers individually and giving them the tools and stuff to put up with the chaos? Because, you know, we talk about, and I'm just curious, you know, but you're absolutely right on. We saw it throughout last year, and we saw beforehand, we were talking a little bit of just some of the local edicts and so forth that different governments are doing, and that weird place that it puts the officers. Can you take action, not take action, so forth. And I think I love what you're saying, but then my question would be, from an officer's perspective, is it something that can be solved, or is it more about resiliency and trying to be able to put up with the chaos?
Well, I think you got two different, that's a question that really has to be unpackaged, because you got two different buckets that you're dealing with. We look at the chiefs of police in the departments, like that's our boss, right?
Right.
Well, we also realize that the office of the chief of police has become politicized.
Right.
Well, if you're in a bigger city, it's even more politicized. If you're in small counties and even smaller jurisdictions, like we have a lot of small towns in Texas, it's a little more easily controlled. But for these big cities, for the chiefs to push back, what's going to happen? They're going to be replaced.
Right. Oh yeah, that's exactly what's going to happen.
Does the chief of police want to wake up every day going, "Oh, I might be replaced"? I mean, I can't. I want to believe that our chiefs of police want the best for our officers out that are in their department. Because you ask any of them, they're like, "Of course, I want the best officers in my department."
Yeah. You
got to start sticking up for your people. Then you got to start going back to your principles, going back to your morals, going back to, why'd you swear the oath? Why did you get into law enforcement? And I don't want you to lose your job, but that may be what happens when you push back. Right. But I think chiefs could probably live with themselves if they did have to resign or they got fired, because then you have the press to utilize to, make light of exactly what happened.
And hopefully make changes, because the worst case scenario, which I think is what we're starting to see too. And I don't want to go too far down this road, but I think you bring up a very interesting, not only interesting, but a big concerning part for law enforcement today and going forward. Because, that chief, let's say it is someone that stands up and he's like, no, this isn't how we do law enforcement. This isn't what's right. It's not constitutional, whatever that situation may be. Well, then he's got an option, like you said, and most likely they're going to replace him. And when they replace him, they're probably going to replace him with somebody who's more in line with their thinking. So now the officers below him have a choice, whether we're talking command, and like you said, it's chain of command. So it's going to come all the way down to that front line officer trying to decide, well, is this the way we do law enforcement or not? Are these constitutional orders? Are these not? And it will be interesting to see how that plays out, because if there isn't a pushback from the community saying, no, this isn't how we're going to do this, it kind of becomes a very vicious cycle.
It is a vicious cycle. And that other bucket is where the officers must be committed to developing their own resilience and their plan B. Unfortunately, 2020, we saw the most amount of law enforcement ever walk off the job.
Yep.
Some of them took the early retirements. Some of them, had many, many years past retirements. Were like, I'm out of here. And some of them were not even 5 years on, saw the writing on the wall in their departments, like, see ya, and moved their families. I know a couple moved their families halfway across the country to land in departments that aligned, more with their principles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So Sam, I really appreciate it. This has been a great conversation. Let me ask you, there's one question I ask every guest that I have on the show, and that is, what's the one takeaway? We've gone over all these different things, and we've talked about these major, and we could go on for quite some time, and I'm going to link up the book because I really want everyone to read your book. I believe it's called The Silent Fall. Is that correct?
It is. Yes. It's called The Silent Fall. Yeah.
So I want everyone to read that, but what's the one takeaway, the one thing that law enforcement officers can do? If you're going to boil it down to a single thing, they'll make a difference in their life, a positive difference in their personal life.
Well, like I always say, it's okay not to be okay. We just don't want you to stay there. For those of us who have experienced the very dark side, who have gone down that road, we don't want you to ever get there. And to know, again, that you have a safety net. You have officers out there, myself and my partners. We've got your back. We've got that net. And for anybody listening, all you have to do is go on the internet, type in the letter A, badgeofhonor.com. You can reach out direct. And again, that all important, scroll down to our resources and get the help. And it's not just for you. Those resources are for your families too, because the families also need to assist and need to understand what you're going through.
Perfect. And I'll be sure to link that up, and definitely any listeners, make sure you do that right now, abadgeofhonor.com. Make sure that you guys go there right now. Sam, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Wayne. And thank you for your messages, for keeping the Thin Blue Line positive, for being a role model out there, and just keep up the great work. Really appreciate you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
You bet.
Thanks.